Many parts of the economy have already been hit hard by coronavirus, but maybe none harder than the retail sector. With restaurants, hotels, bars, casinos, cruise ships all shutting down, many thousands have lost their jobs. The huge spike in unemployment claims around the country this week is one measure of what's happening. Most of these workers have no meaningful savings. For them, this is a tragedy, and in the current news maelstrom, it hasn't received nearly the attention it deserves. But what if the country understood that the plight of a waiter in San Antonio could materially affect people's retirement plans across the country? And in fact, it could. To a much greater extent than many of us realize, the American economy is interconnected, virtually every part of it. Think it through. A restaurant in Cleveland closes. Many have closed. In fact, every bar and restaurant in that state shut down on Sunday night. With no revenue coming in, it isn't long before the restaurant's owners can't pay their rent, so they don't pay it. This is a crisis for their landlord. He's got a mortgage. After a while, he stops paying it. The problem is that mortgage likely has been sold to somebody else. Who exactly? Well, with commercial mortgages, that's not always clear. It could be insurance companies, foreign investors, investment funds, among many others. The point is, that mortgage is no longer held by the bank down the street. It's now bundled with a lot of other mortgages like it. It's now a financial instrument. Investors have bought it with the expectation of regular income from payments that are no longer coming in. Those investors, pension and retirement funds, control much of America's savings. Now they're in trouble, and so are the people who rely on them. Families of retired auto workers in Oakland County, Michigan, firemen in Sacramento, retirees in Sun City and Cape Coral and the Villages, a lot of the country. Meanwhile, the waiters from the shuttered restaurant in Cleveland are still hurting. One of the first payments they'll likely stop making is on their credit cards. Now, no one's weeping for the credit card companies. They're still charging an average of 19% interest at a time when the Fed is shoveling cash at the banks pretty much for free. But it's more complicated than that. MasterCard will not suffer alone. As with mortgages, a lot of credit card debt has been sold to investors. Once again, America's retirement funds could take a big and unexpected hit. This is what happens when buying and selling debt becomes huge business on Wall Street. A crisis in one sector of the economy very quickly affects the rest of it. Everything is connected. There are no firewalls. Remember back to 2008. The value of real estate assets that year dropped seemingly overnight, and this didn't just affect realtors. Some of our biggest financial institutions teetered on the edge of collapse, and some did collapse. Many homeowners discovered they owed more on their properties than the properties were worth, so they defaulted. And that began a chain reaction that led to the worst economic period since the 1930s in this country. When it came time to untangle that mess, auditors couldn't figure out who owned a lot of the empty properties. The mortgages on them had been bundled and sold sometimes many times. They'd been financialized. Despite many promised reforms, that really hasn't stopped happening. Our economy is still heavily dependent on regular interest payments from the middle class. In other words, when you don't pay your credit card bill, it has ramifications that you may not have known existed. Now, this arrangement has made a small group of people fantastically rich, but has left many others dangerously exposed. We could soon learn why it matters to everyone when they close the bars in Miami. Ray Washburn is a businessman in Dallas. He operates shopping centers as well as 65 bars and restaurants. He's both a landlord and a tenant, so he's experiencing this moment from both sides. From 2017 to last year, he ran the Overseas Private Investment Corporation for the Trump administration. He joins us now. Ray, thanks so much for coming on tonight. So you've been in the restaurant business essentially since college, probably close to 40 years. You've seen a lot of ups and downs. Have you ever seen anything like this? How is this different?
Well, Tucker, thank you for having me on tonight, because the restaurant business is much like a family. All our employees over the years have worked for us for a long, long time. We've embraced them through ups and downs, and now we come to something like this. Yesterday, tens of thousands of restaurant employees all over the country were let go, and it was like having to let family go. But there was no alternative. As the cash crunch being shut down, that there is no income to pay these people.
So what are the ramifications of that, apart from the tragedy of having to lay off people who work for you and in some cases you love? What does it mean for the rest of the country when that happens?
Well, our biggest concern, and I'm both a landlord with other restaurants as tenants and also our own restaurants, is April 1st, 2 weeks from today, is a day of reckoning, in my opinion, because you're going to have rents that are due, you're going to have mortgages that are due, and you're going to have bondholders that are due, as well as vendors that are owed money for the last 2 or 3 weeks. 2 weeks ago, everyone was having a booming year in the restaurant business, and now 2 weeks later, we're totally shut down. And so in the next 2 weeks, the Trump administration, which so far has been incredibly positively responsive to all the trade associations that have gone to them, whether it's the shopping center trade or the National Restaurant Association, they've been very responsive to our needs that we need. But really the biggest need that we have right now is business interruption insurance. Right now, business interruption insurance, which all businesses carry, don't cover pandemics. They cover things like hurricanes, floods, and things like that. They don't cover this. And the same for landlords. They don't cover it for landlords. So everyone's looking at each other going, what happens 2 weeks from now if we don't get our arms around it and get the legal side of this equation figured out?
So the last question, I mean, the deadline, as you said, is April 1st. Most people, me, I'm not in business, I didn't know that. What will happen to the businesses if they don't get assistance in making that deadline? Like, will some of them not come back, do you think?
Oh, a lot of businesses aren't going to come back. A lot of retailers that are teetering on this internet disruption already probably won't come back. But one solution is business interruption insurance. If the U.S. government would back insurance companies and say that a pandemic is business interruption, then a lot of this could be worked out pretty quickly, and the insurance industry could work it through. It wouldn't have to be a big bureaucracy set up by the government. It would just be a government guarantee of insurance companies. And then the chain that goes all the way up between the tenants to the landlords to the bondholders, that would be the backstop. Very easy to put into place.
Right. It's amazing how complex something as simple as a restaurant turns out to be, and how key it is in the American economy. Anyway, thank you for explaining that. Ray Washburn, great to see you tonight, and good luck. Godspeed.
Okay. Thank you, Tucker.